Good evening. You're always the first one in here. Well, usually. It's like clockwork. And I don't know if you can hear me yet. You're probably still watching it at. Whoa! We had a little bit of a overflow on my soda. Oh, okay. Yay! You did your homework. We'll have to wait for the other student to come in. And good evening, Cinderella. As soon as I said the other student, she shows up. You guys are like teachers' pets. Like you show up right on time. I don't have to mark you tardy. Uh, Hey, Sophie22, welcome back. How are you? How was your week? I got to do a little bit of moving. I got to move my keyboard out of the way because I don't think y'all. Not too bad. I think we've had a pretty decent week here, Granny Week here on the channel. Yeah, so always excited to have people back. Okay, I got to move my. I got a large enough desk, but it's really not that large. It's not really. The week's been good. Been crocheting literally all week. Good practice, practice, practice. Before we get into it, I'm going to wait to see if a couple more people will come in. I don't want to jump right into everything. Tonight is the last stream of Granny Week. I mean, we'll come back to Granny Squares in the future. Don't fret. But it's the last one of, I guess, quote unquote, official Granny Week. And if anybody's crocheting, I know two of you are crocheting along because you were here last night, and I had mentioned a little prep ahead of time if you don't want to be left behind, or not left behind. That's not the correct thing. If you wanted to get a jump start on it, then there's that. For those of you who are new, like Sophie, who was new tonight, I don't think you were here last night. We're we're doing. I'm going to show real brief. I'm not really going to get into it just yet until people come in. But we're doing the Chevron Granny, and it's not showing up that well because it's dark colors on a black background, and they're still dark colors, and the lighting is weird, but you get it. It's purple, blue, and green. But it's done in a chevron or a zig. There we go. You can kind of see it. A zigzag pattern. So that's what we're going to be. The first part of the evening, we is what we will be attempting. And I'm just checking my follower and the community. It just there's like a slow delay about people showing up into it. I don't like the way it is, but it's technology. It is what it is. Okay. One other thing when we get into this, one thing to have handy for the very beginning of this stitch is to have a stitch marker of some sort, either an actual stitch marker, a little piece of yarn. I believe it or not, I don't own any stitch markers. I just use little tiny little scraps of yarn to mark my stitch if I need to. Most of the stuff I don't need stitch markers, but if I do, I used to use a little scrap of yarn. I don't know if I've ever actually used a plastic stitch marker or an actual stitch marker. Okay. Again, it's not something I don't really have to. For most things, well, circles in the round, sometimes I get that helps to count. But most of the things I don't really have to keep track of the stitch, the number of stitches as much. Alrighty, so let's see. I'm wondering if oh, there, yep, Granny's here. Grammy is here. I see her in the list of users. Let me just update and check this setting over here. I have some. Thank goodness I have some for this blue project. Oh yeah, the project that Grammy's working on. She was telling me how she has to joining them together, and yeah, and it's complicated. Well, it's kind of complicated. You kind of have to line it up a certain way. So yeah. Sophie, what's your question? Questions are great. Okay, so a round's the same thing as rows, but in a circle. Yes, essentially yes. Um, where is my? And I frogged my rows from the other night. So rows, you go back and forth, back and forth. If you read a pattern, it'll say row one, do this, turn, chain, and do whatever. Okay, it's the same thing, and with rounds, could either be a square or an actual circle, like a actual circular shape. Either way, when you do it, you're doing your stitches, but you're doing it and around. You usually don't flip your work. There are some exceptions, and there will be an exception later tonight where we will flip our work with a round, but that's, like I said, an exception. So yes, if you're going in a circular motion, like a square, even though it's square, you're still going around and around and around as you get bigger and bigger. Rounds are the same thing as rows. Okay. Main difference is when you usually flip your work and the other ones you usually don't. All right. So if anybody rectangle, yes. Thank you, Cinderella. Rectangles, hexagons, octagons, anything that's just not stripes back and forth, back and forth. This here, this is rows actually. Okay, this we will go work to one end, flip, chain, work to the other end, flip, chain. This is a row, except there's increases and decreases involved. So this is not a round. Yes. What Clay Miko said, each round. Okay, this example here, this is a granny square. It's got 3 rounds. So this right here, these 4 little clusters, when they were formed, that was one round, or you can look at it as a row. And then these, the next one's around, is a round or a row. And then the same thing with the outer ones. So each time you go around, it gets bigger all the way on all 4 sides. Or if it's a circle or a hexagon or whatever shape it is. You're just growing from the center outward. Hope that answers your question. Okay. So let's get into the granny chevrons. And chevron just means like pointed, like an angle. Okay, because the pattern you're working on, it says work in the continuous rounds. Okay, but the direction calls them rows 2. So it's just clarifying. Good, yes, it does. Yes, yep. I'm not saying there's anything bad about how that pattern is written. Most patterns will call them rounds for each time you go around, but it could be used interchangeably. It's just how that designer decided to refer to it in the pattern, but it's the same. So you're it's a free pattern. Oh yeah, fine. So like, what type of pattern are you doing? Are you doing a granny square? Are you doing a circle? Is it a like what basic shape? You don't have to tell me the name of the pattern, but like what basic shape? Like is it's oh, it starts as a circle. Okay, yeah, that's cool. The only thing with that is, and you're probably going to learn in the pattern, each time you go out, each round you go out, you're going to have to, they're going to increase, and you're going to got to account for that. But if you're following the pattern, trust the pattern, that's slightly a little different than an owl pattern. That sounds cool. Okay, we're gonna. Oh, I can't zoom out. Oh yeah, I can zoom out a little bit. Well, let's zoom back in. So for tonight, um, Clemiko said she did her homework. Cinderella, did you do your homework from last night? And Sophie or anybody else who's watching, if you want to crochet along, that's fine too. The homework that was given for this, and it's really easy. For this pattern, the base um, foundation, it's a multiple of 35 plus 1, and then plus 12 stitches for the foundation chain. I don't want an apple. So yeah, so the repeat for this is 35 stitches plus 1, and then you're going to do 12 additional chains for the foundation chain. So one repeat plus the foundation is going to be 48 chains. If you're going to make it wider, you're going to do multiples of 35. And then after you do this, and if anybody's stitching along, I just have my chain. So you can take your time if you want to stitch along. Let me know so I don't go too fast and get ahead of everybody. So after you have your chain, and some of you already from last night have already done this. The second chain from the hook, you're going to do a single crochet, and you'll do a single in the rest of all the other chains. So every chain that's left, you're going to do a single. So again, it's a multiple of 35 plus 1 plus 12, and the sample we're doing happens to be 48 chains for this sample. Again, if you're doing a wider blanket, you do your multiples of 35 first, and then add on the 1 and add on the 12. And it's weird how it says that you add on 1, then add on 12. Again, the 12 is just for the foundation chain because it's going to take into account these increases and decreases. And the stitch count, again, is 35 plus 1 for each row. So all the rows are going to be 35 stitches plus 1 because it's the way the math works out. It's just, that's the way they refer to it as. So again, you're going to do single crochets in all of your chains. And if anybody who is stitching along, if I'm going ahead too far ahead, let me know. And I know Clay Miko and Cinderella are sitting there waiting for me for a change. Oh, yes. Happy. If North Fairy is around, everybody wish him a happy birthday. I don't know if he wanted to be called out on stream, but sorry. Hey, Ghoul Misfit, welcome. I think you were in Daniel's stream earlier today, like an hour or so, well, more than an hour, a couple hours ago, and I was in there and I was chatting while I was watching him, and I ended up taking a nap. I fell asleep, not because he's boring, but I was laying down. Oh, you sent him to the store for more rum? And just a heads up for anybody who's new, and actually anybody who's still here, anytime I'm doing a stitch that is in the book I have called the Crochet Stitch Dictionary by Sarah Hazel, the picture will be here. That's how you know that it's in the book. And I don't always say it on stream, and I guess I should say that I credit her, but I do credit her, or yeah, cite her when I do upload it to YouTube. No, they have the rum, but it's just the other day he had to go out and get rum, and he got chocolate, and there was something else he got. He said, "You be pirates." So again, to recap, for this sample, I've chained 48, and then second chain from the hook, did a single crochet, and then all the other ones I'm doing single crochets right now. So when I get done, I'll have 47 single crochets. And that is where we will continue. And if you're not crocheting along, that's fine. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to chit chat like you guys are. I like the interaction, even if it's just you guys chatting with each other. And for anybody who happened, I mean, I'm going to look on my own, and I know Grammy was looking. But if anybody comes across a free pattern for a men's crocheted cardigan sweater button up, and it doesn't have to be button all the way up. I don't want it to be like I mean, it can have like a V opening. Let me know. I've done a little bit of looking, but I haven't. Like a pattern for it. Because I think I want to attempt my first wearable besides a hat or a scarf. Okay. So those of you who are crocheting along, we're at this stage where we've got single crochets into our chain. We'll have 47 of them. This first row that we're going to do now is the part that's going to give you a headache. After you get past this first row, the rest is a breeze. Okay. So what you're going to do is you're going to chain 3. No. Ghoul Misfit, you're not disruptive at all. No. You're great. So you're going to chain 3. And I got to zoom in a bit because so y'all can see what I'm doing. So after you've got single crochets in all of your foundation chain, you got 47 of them. Oh, before we get any further, Okay, you can chain 3. Set that down for a second. The opposite end. This will help you in counting. The opposite end, we're going to count the single crochets. We're going to count 12 of them. So the opposite end from where your hook is, find the 12th one in from the end. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And in that 12th one, put a stitch marker. I found that this helped a lot, so I don't have to worry about counting when we come back to it, because this is part of the pattern. And I just lost count, so I gotta count again, but I'm using, no. You've chained, no. You've chained your foundation row, and you've gone back into that chain, and you've done single crochets in all of them. So you don't go into the first, when you did your chain, you did your 48 chains, you skip the first chain, and you do single crochets in all of the rest of the chains. Have you done that already? Was that, or did you just do the chains? That is zoom in more, I think. Is this right here? This. Hey, DJ, welcome. You're gonna count the single crochets. Yeah, you're gonna count the single crochets. So you're gonna find the 12th one. One, whoops, two, three. Wait a minute. Oh, okay. You can see them better from that side. 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12. Okay. In the 12th one, put a stitch marker of some sort. I'm just putting a piece of a yarn in there. I'm not even going to tie it because it's long enough, and it's only going to be there for that first row. Alrighty. So that's at that end, and your whoopsies. After you've marked that, now anybody's crocheting along, I will let you count and put your stitch marker in. 12, 12 stitches in from that end, not the end where your hook is. And that's just to let you know when you come back, because there's some extra things when we get to that part. So yes. Okay, the original for this sample, it's 48 chains, and then we're going to skip the first chain, and then all the other chains are going to have a single crochet. You're going to have 47 single crochets. If you're going to make a project with this, the multiple is 35 plus 1 plus 12 for the foundation chain. We're just doing one repeat, so we're just doing the one segment as a sample. And again, it's to make this, which is the granny chevron. For those of you who are coming in new, it's variation on the granny stitch and a variation on the chevron stitch. Yep, 35 plus 1 plus 12. And the 12 is just for the foundation chain. Each row of the rest of the body the count will be 35 plus 1. Okay. So once we've done all of our single crochets, Because it doesn't work that way. Because those 12 extra from the foundation row are only for the foundation chain. They're not going to be the numbered repeat. Yeah, the row repeat for this blue row is 35 stitches plus one more. It's just the way the pattern is. I don't have any other explanation for it. The 12 for the foundation are only for the beginning to accommodate when you start with the increase and decrease of it. Okay. So we've chained 3 and turn, or if you turn and then chain 3, however it works for you. I usually chain first and then turn. That's just so I know. Got that in place and then move it. However you do it. This is the difficult part because we got there's a whole lot of mess on my screen. I'm referring to the pattern. So bear with me. It's going to sound confusing, but we'll get there. So we've chained 3. So we're going to skip the first 3 single crochets. And then in the following crochet, the following single crochet, so the 4th one, we're going to do 3 doubles. So do 3 doubles in the 4th one from in that row. So we've chained 3 and we're skipping 3, and in the 4th we'll do 3 doubles into that 4th chain. All 3 go into that one chain. Okay? Then after you do those 3 doubles, you're going to skip, and don't worry, it will get a lot easier to keep track. Oh, yes, yes. In the stitch. Sorry, didn't mean to sound that. Sorry, that kind of sounded rude. I didn't mean to sound that way. You do it in the stitch because you're not going into the chain. I'm going to start again. I'm going to chain 3. That's our turning chain. And we're going to flip. And we're going to, that was our turning chain. That's going to count as a double crochet. Oh, that's fine. That's okay. And you're going to skip the first 3 single crochets from your base here. And in the 4th one, do 3 doubles. Okay? Oops. Those chains are a double crochet, and that's going to be our corner edge. And this is going to be a space. It's going to form a chain space. And you're going to skip the first 3 singles, and in the 4th one, do 3 doubles. And like DJ said, once you get the granny pattern established, the rest of it is going to be great. It's this first row working into this to establish the granny and the increase and decrease for the chevron. Yep, it's setting you up for the next row, and it's making a hole or a space to work into. You actually said it a lot better than I did. Okay, so you've done that. Now you're going to skip 2 single crochets, so 2 stitches, and in the 3rd stitch, do 3 doubles. 1, 2, and 3. So after that first cluster, You're going to skip 2, and then the third, do 3. There's no chain involved in between our clusters of doubles. And after you do that, you're going to do that one more time. So you're going to skip 2 singles, and in the third single, do 3 doubles. Yes, in this pattern, there is no chains between the clusters. Some grannies do that and some don't. Like a traditional basic granny square usually has a chain between the clusters. In this one, there isn't. So to recap this, we've chained 3, we've skipped 3 singles. In the fourth single, we've done 3 doubles. Skip 2 singles. In the next single, do 3 doubles. Skip 2 singles, and in the next single, do 3 doubles. Yep. Oh, there's all different types of granny squares. This whole week, all of the stitches I've shown have been variations of the granny stitch. There are rows back and forth. Last night I did I showed the rows back and forth. I did Tunisian granny rows. I did mosaic grannies on Tuesday. I did rectangular grannies. And that's based on the basic granny square. It wasn't like anything real intricate with... I don't think so. I don't think it would be, because the edges are all going to be straight, and my tails aren't tucked in here, so they're basically double crochets all the way up, so you can work into the stitch. You wouldn't work into the space, and then you would just have to, on the ends, the zigzag or the chevron part, find a border that would work for the increase and decrease. Okay. So we've got 3 clusters of our double crochets. And what we're going to do is we're going to skip 2 more stitches, and in that third stitch we're going to do a type of increase. So we're going to put 3 doubles into the third stitch. Again, we've got our 3 clusters. Whoops, get it in frame. Our 3 clusters. And if everybody, if I'm going too fast for everybody, let me know. I have a tendency to stitch fast and talk fast. So we've got our 3 clusters. We are going to skip 2 stitches, and in the third stitch do 3 more doubles. So technically you've got 4 clusters. The end here, there are 3 single crochets you've skipped, and then in between each one you're skipping 2. There's a little extra on the ends. Hey, Nor Fairy. So if we're all to this point, whoever's stitching along, I hope I'm not confusing anybody. So basically you've got the 4 clusters. And then after you've made the 4th cluster, you're going to chain 3. And after you chain 3, that same stitch that you made that cluster in, that last cluster, you're going to do 3 more doubles to make another cluster, still in that same stitch. So where this cluster went into, after you do the cluster, you do 3 chains, and then in that same stitch you do 3 more doubles. And this yarn is not the best, and my tension was off on that, so let's... Yep, this makes the peak of the chevron. This is the increase. So what you should look a little bit like this. You've got where you skipped here in the beginning, your chain, your turning chain, you skipped the ones you skipped, then your clusters, you got 4 of them all in a row. After that 4th one, chain 3, and then do another cluster in that same stitch as that last cluster, okay? So this is going to be your first peak, and it's the increase, like you're going up the mountain. Yes, it's like a corner, but you're not going to constantly make a square. You're rounding the corner, and then you're going to go down, and then you're going to go the opposite angle. Yep. So after we've done that, and I'm following my pattern, so that's your corner. So now you're going to skip the next 2 stitches, and in the 3rd stitch, do a cluster of 3. And again, they're double crochets. Whenever I say cluster, they are double crochets, and there are 3 of them. So after you've made your corner clusters, and I'm considering the cluster and the chain and the cluster, well, the 3 chains. So the cluster, the 3 chains, and the cluster, that is what I'm calling the corner, because that all gets worked into that 1 stitch. So that's the corner. Then you're going to skip 2, and then in the 3rd stitch, do a cluster of 3. And I hope you guys can see this good. If I zoom in too much, then it kind of gets blurry. Then after you do that, you're going to... Yes, this will be a 1 row repeat. After... Not this row here. This is basically going in. This is setting up your pattern. The following row after this will be the 1 row repeat. This is kind of just establishing the pattern of the chevrons. So after we've done that cluster, we're going to skip 2, and in the 3rd one, do another cluster of 3. 2 and 3. Yes, they are. You don't have to worry about doing something different each time. So to repeat what we've got, here we've got our turning chain. We skipped our couple stitches to form that hole. We've got 4 clusters. Well, actually, I'm going to say we've got 3 clusters. And then here, we've got our corner grouping, which is a cluster, 3 chains, and a cluster, all in that stitch. And then to descend, to go down, we're skipping 2, and then the 3rd one do a cluster, skip 2, and the 3rd one do a cluster. So you kind of already see it's forming that chevron pattern. All because of what we did here at the top. And I'll wait till people catch up. Okay, I'm just reading ahead what I need to do. Okay, oh, okay. Yeah, I've done it in regular single. Actually, no, I've done it in doubles, and it's basically the same thing. It's just you've got holes in the granny formation. Okay, this next one here, I'm not crocheting along because I can't do fiber right now. Just learning, so if I can crochet again. Okay, yeah, sure, definitely. And again, after any of my streams, um, after I finish the end the stream each night, I upload them to my YouTube channel. So you can always, and the YouTube channel is in the About section. You can always go back and watch previous streams because Twitch only keeps them for X amount of days, and so I've got a whole archive on the channel. So after we've got, oops, I'm still learning to keep it in frame, and then you zoom in and out, and okay. Yes, a grappled Afghan circa 1978, kind of like that. Yes. Okay. So now this is the tricky part. This is the thing that's going to be kind of new to some of you. It's the decrease if you're not familiar with it. So we're going to skip 2 chains, and in the 3rd chain we're going to do something called double crochet 3 together. And you're thinking, what does that mean? So in the 3rd chain you're going to double crochet. You're going to start the double crochet. So you might want to watch this one. So we're going to wrap like a double crochet in the 3rd, not chain, in the 3rd stitch. The trick used to stay in frame was placing something across the top of the screen that wouldn't move. Then if it went past it. Oh, okay, yeah. Oh, thank you, Seagam, for the raid. Okay, yeah, I'll have to, in the future, I'll have to find something to use. So you're going to skip 2 stitches, and in the 3rd one, we're going to do and it's all going to be in this that 3rd single crochet, and it's called double crochet 3 together. So you're going to wrap your yarn like a double crochet, go into that 3rd stitch, shush, Seagam. So you're going to go into that 3rd stitch, bring up a loop, and you got 3 on the hook. And I should have picked a different color yarn because the lighting. You think I would learn? And then you're going to yarn over and pull through 2 loops. Okay, so that's 1. You're not going to finish the double crochet, and you're going to do that 2 more times, all in that same stitch. So I'm going to repeat that again. So the 3rd single crochet over from this cluster we just did. You're going to wrap your yarn in the 3rd stitch, go in, yarn over, bring it up. So we have 3 on the loop on the hook. Yarn over through the first 2. That's 1. And then we're going to wrap like we do a double. Go into that same stitch, bring up a hook. Okay, Seagam. And now you got 4 on the hook. You're going to yarn over and go through the first 2, and now you're going to have 3 on the hook. That is 2 that are done. And now the 3rd one, we're going to wrap our hook, go in the same stitch, yarn over, bring up a loop. We've got 5 on the hook, yarn over, bring through the first 2. And this is creating the valley, this is the decrease. And what I will do, I'll make this here, and then I'll frog it out, and I'll show you again. So we've got 3 in here, and you can kind of see, not where this is, but right here next to the hook, you've got 3 little stitches, but they're not completed yet because the loops are still on the hook. So once you get to that point, you're going to yarn over and pull through all 4, and that will create a decrease. So I'm going to take it out, I'm going to do it over again just to show you. Hold on 1 second. I got to get this established. It's called double crochet 3 together. 4 on the hook. Okay. I'm gonna do it all over again, Cinderella. So from the 3rd stitch over from our last cluster, you're gonna wrap your yarn like a double, go into that stitch, yarn over, bring up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. That is one of them, one of the doubles. Again, it's not completed yet because we're doing them together. So we have to have 2 more because it's 3 together. So then we're going to wrap the hook. Wrap like you do a double. Go in the stitch, yarn over, bring it up, yarn over and through the first 2 loops. Yes. And then that's 2 of them that are formed right here where my thumb is moving. If I get any closer, it's going to get blurry. And you're going to do that one more time. You're going to wrap the hook, because you're doing doubles. And then you're going to go in, yarn over, bring it up, and then yarn over through the next 2. And now you have 4 on the hook after you have done all 3. Because again, whenever you finish a stitch in any crochet, once you're finished, you're going to have 1 loop on the hook. So that was the loop we started with. And then each time we do it, we're adding 1 more loop. And you've got 4 on the hook. And now you're going to yarn over and then pull that yarn over through all 4 on the hook. And that last motion I'm making right there, that is the together part where the tops of all 3 of those doubles are all together. They're all drawn up together like a drawstring. They're all cinched. And I don't know, yeah, you can kind of see how a normal 3 double crochets or clusters, the tops are all separate. It's basically, think of it this, well, no, that's not, no, I was going to think of it a different way, but that's a different stitch. But you see how in a normal cluster here, all the bottoms of the double crochets are all together because they're making a cluster. It's just the tops. 3 of them. Because in the basic granny stitches, it's always a group of 3. Just like a regular granny square, each of these clusters are 3. This one is also 3. There's 3 in here. Okay? So that is called double crochet 3 together. There are variations of double crochet 3 together. There are ones where you do in separate, you would do it in this stitch, and this stitch, and this stitch. That's a different type of thing. For this pattern, they're all kind of, if I would do each of these doubles, if I would start each of these doubles in a different single crochet on my base, on my foundation, and then they would be all together, that would be an upside down cluster. But the beginnings, the bottom portions, I should say, the bottom parts of all of these are in one stitch here, and the tops are all up here. So it's, sure. I'm just afraid if I get too close. So here, they're all going into this stitch. And the light, I gotta do something about my lighting. I don't want there to be too much of a glare. So in this stitch, that's where all 3 are going into. When I started it, they were all going into the same stitch. And then when we finished it, we finished all 3 together. They get cinched at the top here also. So technically, they're all being cinched at the top and the bottom in this type of stitch. As opposed to a regular cluster where they're only all going into the same stitch here at the bottom of the row. If that makes sense. Do you want me to redo this one real quick? If anybody, this is the, do it at a later date. I can't tell if I have 2 or 3. Okay, well, why don't I redo this, and if you want, frog it with me, and we'll go back to our cluster. Well, I just frogged it, so I got to do it again. So I'll repeat. So that was our last regular cluster. Skip 2 singles, and in the third one we're doing 3 together. So we're going to wrap on our hook, wrap like we're doing a double, go into the stitch, yarn over, bring it up, yarn over through the first 2. Now we have 2 loops on the hook. Do that again. We're going to wrap like we're doing a double, because it is a double. Go into that same stitch, yarn over, bring it up, yarn over, and go through the first 2 loops. Now we have 3 on the hook. And do it one more time. You're going to wrap, go into the stitch, yarn over, bring it up, yarn over through the first 2 on the hook. And now we've got 4 on the hook. And once we have that, we're going to yarn over and bring it through all 4 of those loops. Okay? Exactly. Did you have 3 or 4 loops on the hook when you pulled through all of them? Because that will determine how many you made. Okay, you're good? Okay. So, this is good practice because we're going to do this in the next thing. The next stitch. So now we're going to skip 4 single crochets on our foundation. 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to skip 4 of them. And in the 5th one, we're going to do that exact same thing. So in the 5th single from what we just did, wrap your hook, and in the 5th stitch, go in. I did it right the first time, just hard to see. Yeah, that's fine. So you're going to wrap, like, because you're doing a double, you're going to skip 4 singles, and in the 5th single on your base, the 5th stitch, you're going to go in, yarn over, bring it up, and then yarn over through 2. That's 1. You're going to do it 2 more times. So you're going to wrap, go into the stitch, yarn over, bring it up, yarn over through 2. Yes, yep. And then you're going to do that one more time. You're going to wrap, go into the same stitch. The whole time you're doing the same, they're going into the same stitch. All 3 of them are. Bring it up, yarn over through 2. And again, we've got 4 loops on the hook now. And yarn over and bring it through all 4 of those. So once we get to that point, and it's clean, I don't know where Clean Miko is, because I know she's crocheting along. Let me just get my slack out. And I crochet tight, so I'm going to have some twists, but that will go away. So what you should have now is where your start, you're going uphill, you've got your increase here, you've gone downhill, now you're at the valley. Now if you look here, this hole, yes, it is making the corner stitch of the valley. This hole is formed by these 3 chains. This hole is formed when we skipped those 4 single crochets and added this 3 together. Because these here in the valley need to be the 3 together. If they were regular clusters, they'd be too wide, and your finished product would not be square on either side. They wouldn't be parallel. The whole thing would kind of eventually fan out and ripple. So you're accommodating the easing of all of the material into this tiny, not tiny, this small area. Because if not, again, it would push it out and... No, you're not dumb. You're not done for being excited. We have decreases on each row. That right here, what we just did, that technically would be the decrease. Technically. This here, this would be like an increase if you're doing a regular, like all double crochet zigzag or chevron pattern. When you on each row do we decrease? Yeah, well, we will get there. We will get there when we get to the next. We'll get there. We're still working on this base. No, it will not change. Yeah, it won't change your stitch count because you're decreasing here, but to offset it, you're increasing here. So it's math. It's math. I know we don't like math, but like algebra, what you do on one side, you do on the other, and it's an equation. It balances out. So that increase is canceled out by that decrease. So your stitch counts are going to be the same. So it's not going to be anything weird. As long as your initial base that you did and your foundation chain, and if you're skipping the right amount here, everything should be fine. So that's your decrease. Yeah, this one I definitely have to have a written pattern, and to look at the pattern, it's a mess. But once you get into it and you realize, okay, that's what that is, you do it enough times, just like anything, it becomes easy. Okay, so that was our decrease. And in this sample tonight, that is our only decrease because we're only doing a small sample. We're not doing a full wide blanket or a wide whatever. I guess you would do if it's going to be this wide, if it's this big of a repeat, it would work best for a blanket. So that is the only decrease we're going to do tonight. Well, each row is going to have that. So we're not going to have another decrease in each row. And again, we'll work to a couple rows out. Okay. So I got to keep track of where we're at. Okay, so there's that. So now what we're going to do, this is the easy part. You're going to skip 2 stitches. And then the third one, do 3 doubles. So that's a cluster. That's the simple part. I got to get enough slack on my yarn. So again, you're going to skip 2 single crochets. In the third one, do a cluster. And you're going to do that one more time. So you're going to do 2 of those. So you skip 2, and the third one do a cluster, and then skip 2, and then the third one do a cluster. And let me just count something real quick. I'm just looking at my notes. Okay. So when you get to the end of that there, you'll have you're going up, do your increase, and then it will go down. There's our decrease. You're going back up. After you've done your 2 little double crochet 3 togethers that are there, you're going to have 2 clusters. You're going to skip 2, in the third stitch do a cluster, skip 2, third stitch do a cluster. After that, you're going to skip 2, and in the third stitch, and that should be where your stitch marker is. And if it's off by a stitch, it's not that big of a deal. We can always add a stitch here and there. So don't, if you counted wrong or whatever by one stitch, it's fine. So you're going to skip 2 stitches. Again, to recap, I tend to get ahead of myself. After we've done our little decrease here in the valley, we've got 2 clusters, and then after the 2 clusters, we'll skip 2, and in the 3rd stitch is where we're going to make the peak part again. So in that 3rd stitch, you can remove your stitch marker. That's just so you didn't have to worry about counting. So in that 3rd stitch, do a cluster of 3. Yep, it's same here, and it's also listed below. So if you find my channel and you go into I think it's in the About section, there's a link there. It'll take you right to it. Hope you have a good dinner. So, okay, you have a good night. So again, we've got our little decreases here. Our 2 clusters, again, in between each, you're skipping 2 single crochets. After that second one, you skip 2, and in the 3rd one, do another cluster. After you've done that cluster, and I hope I'm not going too fast. Okay? Again, if it doesn't look perfect, this is the first time you're doing it. It's fine. It's just yarn. It could be ripped out and started all over again. Okay. So after we've done that cluster, again, just to keep track of it, everybody's on track. You've got our little decrease, little stitches. You've got 3 clusters. And then after that 3rd cluster, you're going to chain 3. And in that same stitch where that cluster was, that exact same stitch, you do another cluster in that stitch. This is the increase for the peak part of the chevron. So when it lays flat, this here is going to look just like this. This is the repeat. So you're going to do this little cluster, chain 3 cluster all in that, and that will form a corner, basically. That's all you're really forming, is you're doing corners in that direction, and then this one's the opposite direction, instead of always going around. And this, basically, you're making, when you go up here, you go up and you make a left, you're making a right. You're making a left, you're making a right. That's all you're doing. Instead of all lefts, you're alternating left, right, left, right. If you're driving a car, I should, or walking down the street, or whatever. Two, three. After you get that done, the rest is pretty easy. After you've done that, you're going to skip 2, and in the 3rd do a double and a double. Well, in the third stitch, you do 3 doubles. Sorry, I spoke wrong. So after you've done your cluster, you're going to skip 2, and in the third, you're going to do 3 doubles, which is your cluster. And you're going to do that 3 times. So you're going to skip 2, and in the third, do a cluster. Clusters are always 3 double crochets all together in the same stitch. And do it a third time, skip 2, and in the third, whoopsies, do a cluster. And I think might have made a mistake earlier the other day, and it's not a big deal. Yes, you have 2 stitches left. Originally, the pattern said you will have. Hold on. Okay, the original pattern said you'll have 2 stitches left. It's fine. I made the mistake. It's not a big deal. We should have done 49 chains, and then you have 40. It'll still work. It'll still work. So all you have to do with this here, with what we have, in the last one, you're going to do a double crochet. If I would have spoken right and gave you the right stitch count, again, I'm having the same issue myself. You would have skipped 2, and you still, in the last double crochet, the last stitch, you do a double crochet. It's going to be 1 stitch off. Nobody's going to know, and it's only going to be here on the foundation. The rest of it, it's fine. So again, that was my fault. Okay. Whoopsies. So it just happens at the end here, you're going to skip 1 instead of 2. That's normally what you do. And that is the first row. If you've gotten that far, yeah, it's a sample, yeah. If you've gotten that far, the rest of the rows are easy. So you're ready for the next row? You can change colors if you want to. If you want to keep it simple for tonight, keep the same. I'm going to change colors. So again, if you're going to change colors, I'll show you again how to change colors. It's just like any other stitch. When we do our last stitch, our very last stitch, the decrease is the same, but it's actually you don't have to worry about going into individual stitches, just like granny squares. You go into the chain spaces, so that will help it. There's less time trying to find the stitch, and the difficult part will be that, but once we do a couple rows, these decreases, you're going to get it. Believe me, you'll get it. So we're going to change colors. And just to review how to change colors, before we do our last stitch, before we do our last stitch, we're going to start the stitch, yarn over, go through 2, and before we go through the last 2, oh, my voice cracked. Before we go through the last 2 is when we're going to get our next color, and I'm going to choose this green color, this, I don't know what you call it, and we're going to loop it on the hook and pull it through those last 2 on the stitch, the last 2 on the hook, and then we're going to snug up our green tail. No, it's actually prettier than that. Snug up our green tail, and we're going to cut our brown working yarn. We don't need the brown or the tan or whatever we're going to call that. And now we're ready to go with the green. You're just going to snug it up. Keep your tails in your hand. So this here, we're going to chain 3 with your new color, or if you're using the exact same color, chain 3 and flip. After we've done that, we are going to find the first chain space between the first two clusters. We're ignoring what's here next to the hook, and we're going to do a cluster into that chain space. It's not really a chain space because we didn't chain, but that hole, that space that we have there between the two clusters, you're going to do a cluster. And when you do this, it's going to seem weird. It's going to be like, you're like, well, your chain is getting pulled. Well, that's fine because the blanket or the piece or whatever it's going to be, is going to be like that. So that your blanket or we're going to call it a blanket. It's not going to lay like this. It's going to go like this. So this chain, the turning chain we did, is going to actually be perpendicular. It looks weird when you actually are stitching it, but when it's in position, it's going to be great. So again, all you did was if you change colors, or if you didn't, you chain 3, and then in the space between those two clusters, you do a cluster. And you're going to do that 2 more times. So we're going to do it, we did it in this one here, we're going to do it in this one, and that one. No chains between clusters, just doubles. This part can go fast because you're not looking for a stitch, just like granny squares. Once you get established, you're not looking for specific stitches to really go into. And this is actually less stitching to do because you're not doing chains between clusters except for when you increase. And you won't need a stitch marker anymore, unless you do, but I don't, you're not really counting anymore. Counting is done. I mean, we'll count how many stitches we do in a cluster and that, but we're not counting, oh, we have to go and skip this and that. The holes are there for you. You don't really have to go searching for them. Yes, you're correct. At the peak here, you're going to do a cluster, a chain 3, and a cluster all in that peak, that corner, like you would do on a regular granny square. Except, granny square, I usually do chain 2 between clusters for a corner. This one you're doing chain 3 because it's a little bit of a steeper angle, somewhat. So in that chain, this actually is a chain space because there were chains there. You're going to do a cluster, and then you're going to chain 3, and then another cluster in that chain space. And then let's just see here. And then after you've done your corner grouping of your cluster, chain 3, and cluster, in the next 2 spaces going along, you'll do a cluster in each of those, in those next 2. Hope I'm not going too fast for you, but this pattern will basically tell you where the clusters are going to go. It's the big holes. Just like a granny square, the large holes that you make is where you're going to stitch into. So I'll stop here and let you all catch up. Okay? You've gotten this, you've rounded the mountain and you're going down the mountain. You're about halfway down the mountain. When we get to the valley here, just going to show here. Here you've got a hole. That hole, we are not going to stitch into this hole. We haven't got there yet, Cinderella. Hold up. Overachiever. So we're not going to stitch into this hole in the valley. It's the holes on either side of it. So in this hole and in that hole, you're going to do the double crochet 3 together. So after you've rounded the mountain, you've done 2 clusters. In this next hole that you come to is the double crochet 3 together. So I'm going to walk you through it again. Wrap your yarn, because it's double. You're going to go into that large hole, bring up a loop, yarn over, and go through 2. And now you have 2 loops on your hook. We're going to do that again. Wrap your hook, go into the hole, into the stitch, bring up a loop, yarn over, through 2 loops on your hook. Now you have 3 on your hook. Do that one more time. Wrap your hook, go into the hole, bring up a loop, yarn over, bring through 2 loops, and now you have 4 loops on your hook. Does that make sense? You're basically doing double crochets, but you're not completing them. You're doing half of the double crochet, and now when we have 4 on there, 4 loops on the hook, when we yarn over and go through all 4, that motion is completing all 3 of those at the same time. That's why they call it double crochet 3, because you're doing 3 of them all together. Okay? Do that again, but we're not going into the bottom little valley here. We're skipping this hole. We're going into the next one. So what's going to happen is, where I'm pointing here, those 2 where the double crochet 3 together, they're next to each other. So we made one, and the other one's going to go in this hole. So anytime you're in the valley, you skip the hole that's in the center of the valley. You do the same thing. You're going to wrap, go into the space, bring up a loop, yarn over through 2, do it again, wrap, go into the space, bring up a loop, yarn over through 2, do it one more time, wrap, go into the space, bring up a loop, yarn over through 2 more, 4 on the hook, because there was 1 already there, and each time you did it you made 1 because you made 3, and then yarn over and pull through all 4. What you've done is you've decreased now, and those 2 little clusters are sitting, they're going to actually be perpendicular to each other because the way it's formed. And now, in the next 2 spaces, you're going to do clusters. So go to the next space, do a cluster, and the next space, do a cluster. Whoopsies. Again, clusters are always groups of 3 doubles. And there's no chains between clusters with this unless it's a corner. Or I should say a peak. That'll be better. After you got that, we're at the peak. At the peak, You're going to do a cluster, 3 chains, and a cluster. Oopsies, I keep splitting this yarn. There's a cluster. I'm going to chain 3 because I'm at the peak. I'm doing another cluster. We're at the top of the mountain. After you've got the top of the mountain done, just like you did over here, we got 2 mountains and 1 valley. When you go down the mountain, there'll be 3 spaces that you're going to do a cluster in. So a cluster, a cluster, a cluster. And at the very end, in that space, that very last hole, just do 1 double crochet. It could go into the turning chain, it can go into the actual hole. Do it in the actual hole so you don't have to worry about going into chains. So in each of the next 3, and this is on the edges, on the opposite edges, you're going to have 3 clusters on each end of each row. Three. I got to make 1 more cluster. 2, 3. And I'm at the very end, and in that chain space, that big chain space, it's going to sound weird, but you do one double crochet. Now I'm going to change colors here, so I'm not going to finish the double crochet because I'm going to change color. I'm going to cut my yarn. If you're not changing color, then finish the stitch. And then the next row is exactly the same as that row we just did. All the rest are like like the green row that I did. It's that first row of the clusters sets the pattern. So didn't I tell you that once you get past that first increase and decrease row, the rest is pretty easy. Yes, you're going to skip that space, and I got to get there first. 2, 3. You're going to skip that big space. You're going to skip all of this and go to the space between the clusters and do a cluster. How's Clean Miko going? Hopefully we're not too far ahead. But at least that row is somewhat self-explanatory. The row actually will tell you where to put the stitches. I don't want her to get too far behind. Okay. Wow, I've been streaming for an hour and a half. Why don't we do 1 more row, so 3 rows. And then if you're ready to go to the other project, we can. If you still want to stick with this, let me know. I know it's also getting late. Well, it's only 9:30. So again, you've got 3 clusters. Well, you chain, and you got 3 clusters. And now we're at the peak. Oh, I'm getting choked up. At the peak is where we get a cluster, chain 3, and a cluster. third one. And we do the same thing after you've done your corner. The next two are going to be clusters. And then when we get down in the valley, we'll do our double crochet 3 togethers. Okay. After I get to the end of this row, which I think everybody's kind of getting the hang of this now, after we got through the headache of, it wasn't a headache, but got our minds wrapped around that first granny row. Yeah, we're going to get to the end of this row, and then we could do the meme of the stream. Okay, again, recap for the double crochet 3 togethers. I'm down here now. We're going to ignore this middle hole. The gap here, we're going to ignore that one. And we're only going to work on the two on the opposite sides. So we're going to do wrap, go in, bring up a loop, yarn over through the first 2. Yep. Wrap, go in, bring up a loop, yarn over through the first 2. Wrap, go in, yarn over, go through the first 2. And we got 4 on the hook, yarn over through all 4. And you do that again. You skip that middle space, because that's actually a corner. It's an opposite angle. And you go in the next one and do the same thing. You just basically don't finish off the doubles. And if you got all 3, you yarn over and go through all 4. Hope anybody who's watching that's either not crocheting along, that happens to be in here just watching, kind of understands this. And we're at the peak again. So it's a cluster. Okay, I'll check it here in a second. Yes. Yes. They're on either side. They're on either side of that center hole in the valley. The center hole in the valley, you don't touch. Basically, think of it as like a river. You don't go into the river. The river's in the middle of the valley. You don't want to get wet. Don't go in the water. Go on the banks. A weird analogy I just came up with, but stay on the river banks. Don't go in the river. You can walk all over the top of the mountain. You're fine with that, but don't go into that river. I'm at the final end of the row. I got 3 clusters to make, and at the very end, we'll do a double. Stay out of the water. There's flesh-eating bacteria in that river. I said flesh-eating bacteria. It's probably going to be like Norfair is going to be like, what? Huh? So I've done my last cluster, and now in this last big old chain space here, I'm doing a double crochet. Oh no, we don't walk into the light either. So when we have it, those double crochets or turning chains are going to be the actual edge of our work, left and right edges. Oh, now you sound like Mandy. So everybody kind of get the idea of this pattern. It's really not that difficult of a pattern. It's just getting started. And I gotta find that. That's fine. I'm gonna look at your picture you sent me. I see what you did. Oh, wait a minute. Why can't I? Give me a second. I gotta do something. You did great. You did great. Except, and I'm gonna show it. I'm not pointing it out. I'm gonna point it out to show people. I'm not picking on you. But right here, she went in the water. She went in the water. Yes, you got an extra cluster. So that will affect the rest of the pattern. Again, this is a swatch. But if you had that in there, if you actually did it that way, that would actually be more of a wave shape pattern than a chevron, because it's more of a gentler of a curve. That'll be closer to a wave pattern, which there are granny wave patterns. So, but no, I can see the rest of it. You got the hang of it. It's just that you just popped in a cluster there in that center. Oh, cool, yeah. And it works up quick because it's a granny. Granny squares, you like it better than a chevron. You like what better than a chevron? Yeah, there are waves. You'd start out your row a little bit differently. You'd have to do other math, like extra chains and extra stitches. I'm gonna run to the restroom real quick, and then when we when I get back, we're gonna do the meme of the stream, and then we will go to the second project. Again, this is gonna be a long stream. Well, not too long, but I'll be right back. Okay, let's get the meme of the stream. Oh, I gotta make the box smaller. All right. Sent you the meme dedicated to Grammy for tomorrow's communion. I believe it was quarantine associated. Okay. Can't get it. I gotta make my. When you have been at home so long, you begin crocheting everything in sight. I'm not crocheting a cracker. Okay. Thank you for the meme of the stream, as usual. All right, let's change. Oh, what is this? Communion crochet wafers. Okay, we're gonna switch over to the Kaleidoscope Granny. Now, this one here, we're gonna work on it together. I don't have a full sample of what it's gonna look like. So, did you do your homework for this part? Did you do a regular granny square, 6 rows? Every second row, you change color? All right, I gotta pull up my. Okay, so you're gonna bear with me. This is gonna take another way of making your mind work, and you're gonna be like, what in the world? Okay, let's do. I'm doing these 6 different colors just so you could see. It works better with a lot of different colors. Whatever you got, use whatever you got. So after you've got your granny square 6 rounds, and the base square has to be an even number, because what we're going to do now is, instead of working the corner and going around and around, we're going to work on one side at a time. And we need a hole. We need a space, a chain space here, that's in exactly the middle of the side. If that's making any sense. Let's put that like that. And this is the middle hole, chain space of that granny square. Okay? It won't work if it's an odd row. If that outer row wasn't there, this would be the center, and that's not going to work. So it has to be an even number, and a 6 is a good one. Good one to use. So now we're going to pick a different color. I'm actually going to use the white. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to find that middle chain space. It's easy to find. You can count in the middle, or you can find the center of your square and work all the way out. The exact center will be in the middle. And if you have a hole there, or chain space, that's an even number. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go 3 stitches to the right. So this is our center, our 3 stitches to the right. Middle space of 1 inch. Okay. So 1, 2, 3. This cluster here, the 3rd stitch, which is this one right here, because this was our middle. So this outer stitch of this cluster, we're going to go into the top, into the stitch. Let me show you again. This is our middle hole, our middle of our side, and we're going to count 3 stitches over. So it's going to be the right one, the right stitch of this cluster. You're going to put your hook in there. So far, that's pretty easy, right? Okay. So you're going to get your yarn, and you're going to loop it on your hook and pull it up through that stitch. Leave a tail on the back. You're going to chain, just like you're joining. And in that exact same stitch, do a single crochet. That make sense? Again, to recap, we're going to find our center space on our side. Third stitch over. You're going to put your hook in there. You're going to bring your yarn up through it, chain, and do a single all in that same space. That's our anchor. Okay? We're building off of this one side. Forget about the other three right now. We're just doing one side. Okay? So after we do this, in that chain space here, the middle one, we're going to do a cluster of 3. And it's going to look weird because you're not on a corner. And it's going to look weird, and it is going to kind of be pulled towards this, which is what this is what we want. It's going to be pulled. All 3 of those are going to lean a little bit more towards where we just joined. So again, to recap, find the center, the third space over, top of that stitch, third stitch over, top of that stitch, join your yarn with a chain and a single crochet in that same stitch, and in the middle hole space where we first started to find the center of it. I'm sorry if it's so dark with this black background. You know what? Is that any better with the wood, with the desktop? That might be better, because these colors are kind of dark. So after we've anchored with a chain and a single crochet into that third stitch from the center of this edge, after we've done that, then in that center chain space, do a cluster. And do a cluster. Okay. After you've done that cluster, you're going to chain 2. And in that same hole space, that same, where that cluster was, do another cluster. And you're going to be like, what in the world are you doing? It will start to make sense. You've made a corner here. Instead of a corner on here, you're making a corner in the center of your side. And we're going to grow out. So after you've done, and again, this is just like the granny chevron we just did, where we did a cluster and then chains. This is chaining 2 instead of chaining 3 for the chevron. This is chaining 2 just like a granny square. So in there we've got our cluster, our chain 2, and a cluster, all in that chain space hole. And then we're going to chain 1. Okay, wait a minute, I gotta wait. And then we're going to go, I'm just double checking my, okay. So we've done our corner little cluster. We're going to chain 1. And then in our next, on our main square, we're going to find the third stitch over, which happens to be the left-hand stitch of that cluster. We're going to slip stitch into the top of that stitch. Okay? And that's going to be a little difficult sometimes getting in there. So do a slip stitch. So again, to recap, we found the center, the third one over from that to the right, that third stitch, bring up our yarn, chain with the new yarn, chain one, single crochet into that same stitch, then in the large chain space that's here, do a cluster, chain two in a cluster. We're going to chain one after that cluster, and then in the third stitch over from this center, so now we're going the third from the middle, which will be that last double crochet of that cluster, you're going to slip stitch into it. That right there is row one of this portion, of this point, this triangle that we're making. Okay? With the same color, we're going to chain two, and let me know if I'm going too fast. And if I need to back up. And the lighting, oh my God. Either too dark or too bright, and there's a shadow or... Okay. Okay. So we've slip stitched into that third stitch over, and after we slip stitch, we've chained two. Now, we're going to count 3 more stitches. Now that chain that's here, that counts as one. Because remember, when we did our clusters, we did a cluster, chain, then a cluster. So that counts as one. And then the next stitch is 2. And the middle one of this cluster is the third one. In that third stitch, we're going to do a single crochet. I know it's going to look weird. So after we've joined all of this here with a slip stitch, we've chained 2, and then the third stitch over, which is actually the middle of this cluster, into that stitch, we're going to single crochet. Do 1 single crochet. After we do that, we're going to flip our work. Yes, we're flipping our work in these grannies. Top of the middle, yes, the middle stitch in that cluster, go into the top of that stitch and do a single crochet. That's correct. I'm going to show you what we just did. That single crochet is just an anchor to anchor it to our work. Single crochet, then flip, yes. So that single crochet is to anchor it to our main square. These 2 chains that we did here technically is a turning chain. Okay? We just needed to anchor it to what we've already worked on our main large square. So that's a turning chain, and that counts as our first double crochet in a cluster. So this hole here that we just formed from our main square and what we just added, that's right here, we're going to do 2 doubles into that. Okay? When you do the 2 doubles, those 2 doubles plus that chain that we anchored is a cluster. Now, we're going to chain 1. After we've done those 2 doubles, we're going to chain 1. And then we are at a corner here, and we all know what to do with the corner on a granny square. We're going to do a cluster, chain 2, and a cluster, all into this here. Hopefully this is making sense. And I should have picked better colors that weren't so dark. I like the colors, but they're not showing on camera that well. So are we good, um, everyone? Oh, happy birthday, North Fairy. I don't know if I said that earlier. I might have. I think I did. Sorry. Thank you for the bit. Okay. After you've done this cluster, which you formed, you chain 1, and then in here, on the top of this little point, oh, you're just a young un. In this point, you're going to do a cluster, 2, and 3. Okay, I can pause. I can pause. Okay. So I'm still working into the point of this triangle I made. I've done a cluster. I'm going to chain 2, and I'm going to do another cluster. Nope, you're welcome. And I'm running out of slack, so I'm going to pull out more yarn. Okay. So in that corner, we did cluster, chain 2, and a cluster. Now we're going to chain 1. And then in this chain space that's here between the green and the white, we're going to do a cluster. Because that's been anchored. That's where we first started. We're going to do a cluster right into that. Get it going the right way. Okay. So it kind of looks like a let me get this. This kind of looks like this. Just like that portion of it. It's that corner portion of a square is what this is. It's everything is just at an angle compared to our main square. So after we've done our cluster here in that space, we're going to chain 1, and in the third stitch on our main square, the chain counts as 1, 2, and then 3. So it's the middle of the next cluster from our main square. We're going to do a slip stitch. So again, after we've done that last cluster, the chain counts as one from our main square. There's a chain here. Again, I should have picked different yarn. I don't. There's a chain here. And then in this next cluster, the middle stitch, you're going to slip stitch into it. And when you slip stitch, do a slip stitch, pull your loop a little bit. And if you're changing colors, clip your yarn. If not, just change colors and clip your yarn. Clip your yarn, and then once you do that, that loop, that slip stitch that you made, pull it out, and you've done that round of that side. So you've got a square with a little triangle on top. The third stitch from here, so where this was, there was a chain in the green, because you put a chain in between clusters. So that's one stitch. The next stitch is the first one of that cluster, and the third one is the middle one. Yes. So it's the middle stitch of that cluster there that's to the left of this work. Chain stitch counts as a stitch. So you do a slip stitch into that, clip your yarn, and pull the loop, the hook and the loop all the way out, and that will secure your slip stitch. Okay. I'm now going to change colors to a light blue. Hopefully that'll show up. Hold on a second. All right. And flip your work. So you're flipped over back to the right side of your main square. You could tell the stitches look slightly different from one side to the other. This looks a little more bumpy looking. Okay. The rest is kind of like this, but you're just making it larger. And if you ever need more instruction on this, I can always do this again in a future stream. And we're not doing all four sides tonight, so we probably are going to have to continue this over to another evening. I'll have to find an evening. Might have to play around with my schedule for next week. Yes, written directions, yes. Both of these are a little more complicated. This one I think is a little more complicated than the granny chevrons. No, it's fine. Okay. Are we ready, Clay Miko, to continue? Okay. So we flipped our work back over. And our third chain, so we were here, so where we anchored. Our third chain, so it's not going to be this cluster because we've got a stitch here, we got a chain stitch, and it's the very left stitch of this cluster here near the corner. So that very left one, you're going to go in the top of it, and that's where we're going to join our next color. And you're going to bring it up in through the stitch. That could be a little difficult sometimes. And we're going to chain and single crochet into that same stitch. That's our anchor. In the next chain space, the final countdown. What do you mean the final countdown? Um, okay. And so, oh Lord. So we've anchored. Now in this chain space here, between your main square and your triangle, in my case it's the dark green and the white, right in here, in that space, you're going to do 3 doubles. Okay? So that's your first cluster. Again, where we join, that's just our anchor. So we have something anchoring to our existing work. In that space, we do. Someone drum has kicked in. Yeah. We do 3 doubles. That's our cluster. Chain 1. And in the next space, we do another cluster, just like a granny. Just like a granny. It's just getting this thing connected to the main thing. So we do another cluster in that space. And now we're going to chain 1. And we're in the corner here. It's yes, it's your birthday, but that's not the only excuse to drink. You can, if you want to drink on any other day. So we've done our cluster, we've chained 1. Again, you're repeating it just like a regular granny square. You're going into those holes that we're making, those large holes. We're at the corner here, so we're going to do a cluster, chain 2, and then another cluster in that same hole. This part gets kind of easy. I know I say it's easy a lot. Oh, no, please don't do that. Then chain 1, and in the next space, do another cluster. Three. And then, and it might be a little difficult, the next, hold on a second. Okay. So after we've done all of this, did our 2 clusters, our chain grouping, our corner grouping, our next cluster. Now for the next one, I gotta look at my notes for this. Chain. Okay. That is gonna go. Give me a second. 1, 3 double crochet in the next chain space. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Right here, it's gonna be probably sometimes a little difficult. Between where you join that row here, that white and that green, or whatever color you happen to use, but in my example, there's a hole here. You're gonna do 3 doubles, because that's the chain space. So that has formed. You have 3 clusters on each side. And this 2 chains here is the corner. And then after we've done that, I gotta look. We're gonna chain 1, because you chain 1 after a cluster on this stitch. And then the third stitch, when you come up here, that third stitch will be, let's see, I gotta find where it's at. It'll be the left double crochet of the cluster on your main square. You're going to go in the top of that and slip stitch it. Oops, come on. Come on. Slip. It popped out again. Do you hate it when your slip stitch pops out? Slip stitch. That has joined that row. With the same color, after you've slip stitched, you're going to chain 3 and turn your work. No. Wait. Hold on a second. Yes, okay. Yeah, my brain hurts too, but okay. So, you've slip stitched that row to join it, and then chain 3, and then you're going to turn your work, and it's going to seem weird. We're not connecting this to anything yet. So the end of this row is going to be weird. After we've turned our work, am I going too fast for you, Clay Miko? I know she hasn't piped up. And I know Cinderella's taking a break. Anybody else who's following along? If I'm going too fast. Okay. So we've anchored there with a slip stitch into the top of that stitch from our square. We've chained 3. And now we flip. In this space that we formed, we are going to do 2 double crochets. Those 2 and what we just chained here are counting as a cluster because this counts as a double crochet. So in there, in that chain space, we're going to do 2 doubles. We're now working on row 4 of this point. The 2 on the white were rows 1 and 2. This was 3, and now we're on 4. Whatever. Okay. Now, you're going to work the rest of it just like you would do a regular granny square. We've got our cluster. Chain 1, and then in the space, we're going to do a cluster. Three. And now we're going to chain 1, and in that space, do a cluster. And then chain 1, and we're at the corner now. We'll do a cluster, a chain 2, and a cluster. So let's do our cluster of 1, our first cluster. Chain 2 because we're forming a corner, and then we're going to do our next cluster. Yep, I can do that. I remember Rekaloff vodka. That was actually tasted pretty good for being cheap. Okay. Now we're going to continue till we're down here. Just like a regular granny. So chain 1, and again, this is in between each cluster, there is a chain 1. Hey, it did the job. Okay, pause. Okay. That's okay. It is kind of difficult trying to get this all in there and figuring out. This is a little advanced. The hard the difficult part is getting it to join to your main square. The rest of it is just a regular gradient. It's how it's joined. That's the difficult part. Okay. Yeah, I was watching a video. That's where I got it from. You probably watched it from the same video. The video I watched was the YouTuber Fiber Spider, and he was demonstrating how to do this, and it's involved. Okay, so all I'm doing is doing regular granny stitch on this. Oh, TL was doing it too. Okay, I haven't checked her video on that. I'm just doing regular granny on this edge, just like I would do if it was a regular square, until we get to the end. Okay. We're at our last little chain space where it's joined with our main thing, and we're going to do 3 doubles in that chain space because it's a cluster, has to have 3. And now I got to figure out how to end this. Okay. Till end. Chain 1. Okay. When you get to the end here, this is the easy part of this. Now, our little end here is not connected to our square, and that's fine. We're not going to connect this end to our main square either. I can if you want me to. I can do the other 3 because we're going to do this 4 times. So I can walk you through it again if you want to sit and watch for a bit, because after you do it 3 more times, then you get another color and you do 2 rows to finish it off, and it will join these pieces. There's going to be a triangle here and here on all 4, and it's how you're going to join those all together. Okay. And if it's getting late, people need to go to bed. I understand that. But yeah, um I'm gonna finish this right here, right now, because I'm getting ready to do it right this second. And then I will do the other 3. And once I do the other 3, then I can show how to join it all together the next 2 rounds. Because this square has got 6 rounds. Each of these little triangle points each have 4, but to finish the grouping, I guess you would call it, it has 6. So it'll have 2 more all the way around. And that actually is easy. Okay, just to show how to finish this. Yes, it will be square. It's just this is going to be, when it's square, envision that this is a corner, and there will be 4 corners. This here, it's a square. It's just on point. And then you keep growing it. You keep doing it, and then once you get bigger, you could do these more and more, and then it looks like a kaleidoscope. Okay, I'm going to show you how to finish this portion here, this little point, this triangle. So after we've made our cluster, our last cluster, we're going to chain 1. This is real simple. Do a chain 1, clip our yarn, and then pull that through, and we're going to leave that hang. That's how we're going to end one side for now. Now you can go and do the other 3. But when we do that, we want to start on the right side of our big square. This is the wrong side. We want to start on our right side of the big square. So we repeat that same process. what we did here. Have I totally lost everybody? And leave the tails. If you want, you can. You need to do the other 3 first, because once you do the other 3, the next round you do is going to be stitched into this side here. It's going to join it to this corner of this main square, and it's going to be stitched into the next triangle here. So you can't go the next row yet. You have to do all 4 of them and then go around the next round. And that round will join it all together. Because right here it looks weird. Now I understand that you're tired. I mean, it is getting late, but I'm going to continue. And again, when we start, we find the center of a side and our third one over. That's where we're going to join. When we join, we bring it up. Whoops. Not like that, we don't. Bring it up, and then we're going to chain, and then in that same stitch, we're going to do a single. And I got to refer back to my stitches because there's a lot of stuff going on. Oh, then in the center, I probably am not showing it that well. Yeah, using black, yeah. And I'm using this dark color, and it's not helping you guys see. So I've anchored. Now I'm going to go into that center chain space on our row and do a cluster. 2 and 3, and then we're going to chain 2, and in that same one we're going to do another cluster. 2 and 3. So we're forming a little corner. And okay, I'll keep that in mind. Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking. I wanted to put other colors in there, but with my lighting set up, it's best to do the lighter ones. Stick with what I was working with. I didn't want to be boring. You guys seeing the exact same colors over and over, but if you can't see them, it's kind of pointless. Chain, I could change. Okay. The third stitch over, so it'll be the third one over here. We're going to go in and slip stitch it. So that forms our first row of that side. And we're going to chain 2. And then the third stitch over, this is to anchor our what we just made. Again, if I'm totally confusing y'all, I am truly sorry. So we've anchored it. And now we're going to find the third one over. The chain counts as 1, 2. The middle one is our third one. And we're going to do a single crochet in there. That is the anchor. Right now we're starting our second round. So now we're going to flip. And in here, in that chain space that we made, this counts as a double. We're going to put 2 more doubles into that chain space. 1 and 2. And now we're going to do like a regular granny, chain 1, and then in the corner we're going to do our corner cluster grouping. Chain 2, and then our other corner, our other cluster, because it's a corner, just like any other. Back up. Okay, back up to where? To the beginning here. Okay. So I'm going to back up a little bit further probably. Have you gotten to this point where you've done this and the third stitch over, which is actually going to be the far left double crochet of that cluster, you've slip stitched it into there. Have you gotten there? There's a cluster here, and you slip stitch into the top of the far left stitch. Okay. So that's slip stitched into there. So you've slip stitched that in there. After you slip stitch, chain 2. After you chain 2, you're going to count 3 stitches. The chain, and it's green on mine. I'm going to point that out. The chain of your main original square, the green one here counts as a stitch. And then our next cluster, the second and third. So the middle stitch of the next cluster over to the left, so this next cluster, you're going to do a single crochet in the top of the middle stitch of that cluster. I know it sounds weird. All that's doing, going to explain. When we did previously, when we slip stitched into here after we've done this, and we've slip stitched in there, that is anchoring it, this corner to it. So that slip stitch is the end of that row. We chain 2. That is going to be our first double crochet of our next cluster. Just keep that in mind. So that will be our first double crochet. And then the middle stitch of the next cluster, we do a single crochet. That is anchoring the top of that chain to our work. That's just an anchor stitch. Because if not, it'll just hang and you'll have a big old hole. Okay. So we've slip stitched, chain 2, and then we counted over 3 stitches, which will be the middle of the cluster, and do a single crochet. Now we turn the work. And I don't know if this makes sense. The white here, that was the chain we did. That's counting as a double crochet. And that will be the first double crochet of our cluster. And it's all going to go into this hole here between the triangle little row and our main square row. So in there, we're going to do 2 doubles. So those 2 doubles, plus that 2 chain that we did earlier, that we did a little while ago, those form a cluster. It just happens, it needs to be anchored here. So that single crochet that we did in that stitch a minute ago, we're just anchoring all of this, connecting all of what we're doing to our work. We need a way to connect it, because if not, it's going to be a separate triangle by itself. It needs to be connected. So that's our cluster. The rest of this, majority of this, is like a regular granny. You're going to chain 1. This is going to create a space, just like in a regular granny. And we have a corner here. And in that corner, you're going to do a cluster. whoops, do a cluster, chain 2, because where it's a corner. Remember when we do our regular grannies, in the corner spaces we do a cluster, chain 2, and a cluster. It's the same thing. So we've done our chain 2, and then we're going to do another cluster in that same space that we've been working in, which will be the point of our triangle. So that will form this, which is just like on a regular square, it's our corner. This is basically, when we get this done, it's going to be half of a square, but instead of half this way, it's half diagonally. That's what we're making. Okay? After you get that corner grouping, because the corner grouping is always a cluster, chain 2, and a cluster. And again, just like regular grannies, you do a chain after the cluster. And now we're going to do another cluster. That other cluster is going to go the next chain space. So if we look at the row below, we've got a cluster here. Well, there's a hole here that we just worked into. Well, there's a hole to the left of it. We're going to work into that hole. It's not going to be as big as... I don't know how I got that carryover. I'll have to figure that out. Maybe we'll hide it. Anyway. So we're going to work a cluster right in this. So in that chain space to the left of the cluster here, you're going to do another cluster right in that spot. Okay? So I'm going to stop. So when we started over here, we've got a cluster, and then our corner grouping, and then our cluster on the other side. And each time you go out, it's getting bigger. So our first round of this, we're basically 2 clusters. The next round, it's 4 clusters, 2 on each side. You increase as you go, just like you do with a square. After we've got our last cluster made, we will chain 1. And now we're going to slip stitch into the third stitch. So our third stitch will be the middle one. If we're back to our main square, and it will be the middle stitch of the next cluster on our main square. Go in and you're going to slip stitch it, and that is an anchor. Okay? So all we've done is we've done the clusters all the way around like a normal granny. We get to the end of here, we chain 1, because that's going to form a space that we're going to need. And then the next cluster on our main square, we find the middle stitch, and in the top of that stitch, we're going to slip stitch together. After you do that, we're going to cut our tail, and then we're going to take our hook. After we've cut our tail, we're going to take our hook and we're going to pull it out, and it's going to pull that tail out of that through that loop, and then it'll tighten it up, and we're done that round. And then what we're going to do, thank you for the emote. After you do that, after you've cut your tail and you've pulled it through, and that will secure it, flip it back over. And we're ready for our second color again. I'm doing whites as my inner and then light blue for the next round. Okay, that's cool. So, to start our next color, we're going to look where we joined. We joined here, or where we finished, actually. We finished in the middle here, the middle of this cluster. So we're going to count 3 stitches. 1, 2, the chain space of this is the chain is a stitch, and 3. The 3 will be on our main original square, the leftmost stitch of that last cluster. That will be where we're going to put our hook in, and that's where we're going to join. You're going to loop the yarn around the hook, bring it through, keep it like that, so you got a loop coming through. You're going to drop the tail to the back, and with your working yarn, you're going to chain 1, and that exact same stitch, you're going to go back in, and this is the part that can be a pain. Go back in and do a single crochet. So you've joined in that 3rd stitch, which is the leftmost stitch of the cluster here at the corner of your main square. You've brought it up, you've chained 1, and then go back into that same stitch and do a single crochet in that same stitch. That, again, that is our anchor. After we've anchored, that's our anchor. After we anchor, we're going to find the next chain space, which is right here between our white and our green. So what we just did is we did this little triangle here. That is the chain space we're going to go into. We're going to put 3 doubles in that space. Are you with me, Clay Miko? Okay, so in that chain space, you'll do 3 doubles. 2, 3. And now you're set up for this section here for a small amount of time. After you've done that cluster for a few minutes, forget that the big square exists and focus on here. Well, this looks like a granny square. So we've done a cluster. You chain 1, and in the next chain space, do a cluster. And then chain 1, and we're at a corner. Imagine this is just a square by itself. Forget anything else exists. We've got that corner, so we do a cluster. And since it's a corner, we're going to chain 2. And in that same space, again with the corner like usual, we'll do another cluster. Okay. After we do a cluster, you always do a chain. We got another chain space here. Again, we're still forgetting that the rest of the project exists. In there, we're going to do a cluster. Get done the cluster. You're going to chain 1. And our last cluster will be between this cluster and our main square. So right here where it meets, where the main square meets this little bit we just added, there's a space. That space you'll do 3 double crochets. And when I get done that, I will take a pause. Oh, I'm getting all tangled up in my yarn. I'll pause because I got to look at the thing to remember what I have to do. Okay. So after we've got that last cluster done, chain one. Remember, anytime you chain one, the next row, you're going to do a cluster into that. Same thing when we were doing these. In between clusters, you do a chain. When you do a chain one, the next row's cluster will go into to where that chain is. So we did a chain one, and where this is joined, it's joined on, let me look. Okay. Let's see, let me double check this. Third stitch. So the third stitch from here. So the first stitch, let me just double check something over here. Where did I go in there? Third stitch is going to be, if I counted right, right here. It's the third stitch over from where this joined. So where this joined, that's 1, 2, 3. I think it's going, is that the chain? No, that was the top of the middle. Okay, so it's the next cluster on your square that's near the corner on that edge. The very first or the very right stitch is where you're going to slip stitch into. Do a slip stitch. Right? Right, yes, yes. Okay? 3 double crochet next chain space. Yeah, they are expensive, but they're nice stuff. But it's they're priced accordingly because of the material that they're made out of at a local yarn shop. Okay, let me just double check something. Okay. So we've slip stitched into the very first stitch of the next cluster of our main. No, I'm saying that wrong. So you find the corner of our original square, and that cluster there, the first stitch in that cluster is where you're going to slip stitch into. Now what we're going to do is chain 3. 1, 2, 3, and turn our work. Let me check one thing real quick. Give me 1 second. Stitch. Okay, we're good. So we've anchored with a slip stitch, and we've chained 3. Now in this space, we're going to do 2 more doubles. And then you're going to treat it like a regular granny square. chain one, and then in the next space, do a cluster. Chain one, do a cluster, and so on. I'm at the corner now. So at the corner, you do a cluster, you chain two, and then you do another cluster in that same space. And then we're going to continue down the other way. Chain one, then in each space we do a cluster. Three. When we get down here, we're going to chain one. And we're going to do a cluster right. Oh, we're going to do a cluster right in here, because there's our last space. We have to fill in something here. Three. And then what we're going to do is after you get done that, you're going to chain one, cut your yarn, and then pull your tail out. And that second side will be done. Does that make sense? I know it's kind of difficult to remember where to go in and join everything to your main square. And I don't know why I have a yarn a carryover there. Oh, I know why. I know why. That was my tail. Okay. I shouldn't have tucked into those stitches. That makes sense. So are we good so far, Claymiko? Your eyes are probably glazing over from all these grannies. Joining to the body is the problem, yes. Okay. Yes, it's going to take some practice. If you have a written pattern, that will kind of help a little bit too. So now we've got come there, and I'm going to chain one. We need the chain one because that will help. That's going to end up being our anchor knot once we clip, and then pull that through that chain that we did. Two sides are done. Do you want me to keep going for the other two sides? Looks like a kitty cat. Kind of looks like a kitty cat. Do you want me to do the two more sides, or are we tired for the evening? And we can pick this up on another stream. Keep going? Okay. So we're going to flip back to our regular side. Okay. Flip back to our right sides. Again, you could tell one side's a little more bumpy looking than the other. You want to go to the right side, and you pick another side of it. It doesn't matter. Get to the other side's done. Almost have a Chinese food box. A pyramid. Okay. So again, when we start, we find the center hole on our center, and we count 3 stitches over. Right? Yeah. So that's going to be that cluster to the right, the very far right stitch is where we're going to join. We're going to loop our yarn on our hook, bring it through. We're going to do a chain, and in that same stitch, do a single. That is our anchor. After we've anchored, that middle hole that we found. We're going to do a cluster. 3, chain 2, and another cluster all in that middle hole because we're making a corner right away. 2 and 3. So when we joined here and did our chain and single, that's an anchor to anchor it to our work. This is a corner cluster grouping as usual. I'm not certain if Grammy's still here. She probably nodded off. And now we're going to go, we're going to chain 1, and the third stitch from our main block, which is going to be the cluster to the left now, the far left stitch. Wait, no, hold on. Yeah, the far left stitch of that cluster, the top of it, we're going to slip stitch it because that's going to join us to the work. Going into that stitch is a pain. Okay, we've finished our first round. Now we're starting our second round, but we don't flip yet. After we've slip stitched to join, Bird Under the Blue Project, warm and toasty, 2 glasses of wine, fading fast. Wow, you are going to be, you're toasty and toasted. If you have 2 glasses of wine and you're under that blue project that you're joining all together, yeah, you're toasted. So we've joined the third stitch over. So you find the center, the cluster to the right of it, the third stitch over, which will be the very far right stitch of that cluster, is where you're going to join. You're going to bring up your yarn. You're going to chain 1 and single crochet in that same stitch. Then in the chain space, the middle one that we originally found on our main row, on our main square, do a corner grouping, which is a cluster, chain 2, and a cluster, all in that. Then we're going to chain 1, and then from our main square, the cluster to the left of the center, that far left stitch is where we're going to slip stitch into. That is row 1 done. Row 2 will start this way. We're going to chain 2, and then in the third stitch on our main block, we'll do a single. So our first stitch is our chain between our clusters from our green main block, and our third would be the middle one of the next cluster, and we do a single. That's an anchor stitch to anchor the top of our row. Now we can flip. Those 2 chains that we made here counts as a double crochet. That's our first of our cluster, and we're going to do 2 more into that chain space here between the white and the green. A cluster has been formed. Chain 1, and now we're in a corner. So the corner's the same. You do a cluster, 2 chains, and a cluster. 2 chains and a cluster. 2 and 3. Now we're going to do a chain because we're done a cluster. We need 1 more cluster here to match this side, but both sides are going to be even. So in this chain space here between our white and our green, between our triangle and our square, that space, you're going to do a cluster. I always forget what to do next. So we've done that. Then after that, we're going to chain 1, and then we're going to find the third stitch on our square, which happens to be the middle one of the next cluster of our main square, and we will do a slip stitch. So we'll do a slip stitch to join in the third one of our next cluster of our main original square. And we're going to cut and then pull that through, and that will be our anchor. That is row 2 of the corner. It's again, same that we're doing, we're just going all the way around. Now we flip it back over. You're going to have a lot of tails on the back. You have a lot of tails. Now we're ready for round 3. Even though it's not really going in a round, I'm calling them rounds because it's granny. Okay. So now we're going to find the third stitch again. This was joined in the middle, or this ended in the middle of this cluster. So the third stitch, we've got a stitch here, then we got a chain, and then we have a stitch. So it's the very first stitch of the last cluster. And I got to find where I can go into that stitch. Okay. Bring up our new color. And again, just like when you're joining this way, you chain 1, and in the same stitch you do a single as an anchor. And then in this chain space where my finger's coming through, it's where the main square meets the triangle. You'll do a cluster. Again, let me know if I'm going too fast. There's your cluster, and now you're going to pretend the rest of this does not exist. You're going to treat this like a granny. So after you do the cluster, you chain 1, and then you do a cluster in the next space that's available. Three, and then chain 1. We're at the corner. So that means we do our corner grouping, which is a cluster, chain 2, and a cluster. And now, turn the corner. We've gone around the corner. Chain 1. And then you're going to go into the space and keep doing your clusters. And then keep going because you've got to join something here to finish the row because we have to meet up with the green. So we're going to do a cluster in that space between the white and the green. Okay. Then chain 1. This is what, row 3. Chain 1. Okay. Now in the third stitch of our main block, which will actually be the far right stitch of our last cluster of that side, you're going to slip stitch to anchor. And I need to take a drink. Once you get this far and you get like 3 of them, you can start to visualize how it's going to look because you got a square and then you got the other points going off. to do, okay, for row 4, because we've done 3 here, row 4, first we're going to chain, yeah, it's a lot of remembering. It's not as easy as a regular granny. So you're going to chain 3 and then turn our work. That chain we did counts as a single, I mean a double. And then in that chain space here, you're going to do 2 doubles. And then you're going to finish all the way around like normal. The hard part is the anchoring to the original square, because it's at different angles, and doing the actual rows of this is just like a granny. Heck, this could have been a stream all by itself, just the kaleidoscope. It doesn't seem real that we already did the chevron this evening. I'm like, that seemed like that was like the other day. But it'll be pretty looking. I mean, if you use the right colors, it'll look pretty. Um, Once I get more of this done, I can show a picture of it. Again, this is just a sample to get the idea of how to do this. Okay, I'm at the end of this. Now I need to anchor. Figuring out the anchoring part is, okay, I did a cluster. Chain 1. How do I anchor? Oh, I'm going to anchor in. Wait a minute. Did I do that right? No. Oh, I'm not going to anchor. I'm not going to anchor because I'm at the end of that row. The end of that row, you chain 1, and now you cut. And I've done 3 sides. Again, flip it back over. And now I'm going to do the last side. I'm going to do this last side. If we don't do the last 2 rounds of this tonight, I can always do that tomorrow, first thing before we do temperature blanket. That won't take that long to do. And I'm not going to do a full blanket of this because it can keep growing and growing and growing, and you keep getting larger. So again, we're going to find where we start and the 3rd stitch over, which would be the far right stitch of that cluster. Is where we're going to start. Oops. Join our yarn with a chain and a single. And now we're going into that chain space with a cluster, 2 chains, and a cluster. Yeah, I think that's what we're going to do. I think we're just going to finish this last corner here. And then tomorrow we will, first thing, I'll show how to do the last two round. Oh, I only did the last two rounds of this. I didn't do enough doubles for that cluster. I only did two instead of three. Oops. Because I know it's getting late. It's already 11 o'clock Eastern. So we're going to anchor with that. We've anchored our little triangle. Oh, we got to anchor with a single crochet. Chain. Wait. Chain one. Oh, no, no. I anchored right. I anchored right with a slip stitch. And now I got to chain two. And in the third stitch here, which would be the middle one, the third stitch, anchor with a single, and then flip. And now I can do my doubles for my cluster and my usual corner grouping. Do our last little cluster over here. My arms are getting tired too. Chain one. I gotta remember how to, and in the third stitch, okay, in the third stitch we're going to finish, which is the middle of that cluster, slip stitch, and now we're going to change colors. Once you get the hang of it, it can go quicker once you know how the pattern is and where to join. So now we're going to find the third stitch over, which is going to be the first stitch of the last cluster of that side. Okay. Bring up a loop, chain one, and single crochet in that same place. We're on row 3 now. In this chain space, we're going to do a cluster. Have I lost everybody? Okay. Yeah, just take some patience and chain two because I'm at the corner already. Two and three. Chain one. Do our last cluster here. The last of this little row, I should say. Now we got to figure out how to anchor it. I always have to go back and refer to that. Chain one, three in that chain space. So we're going to chain one. Now in the third stitch, going to be in that one there. We're going to slip stitch you together. And now we need to chain 3. Because I'm on row 4. I'm starting row 4 now. So chain 3, flip, and then we work 2 chains into that grouping. Because that counts as a double. So that will make our cluster. Chain 1, and then keep doing our little cluster groupings all the way around our corner. What I would recommend if you're doing this, once you get all 4 in here, do all 4 corners, then weave in your ends before you go any further. Because you're going to have a lot of ends to weave in. Hey, Miss Uggle Misfit. Didn't know you were still here, but thanks for hanging out. Yep, we're still good. This is actually the longest stream I've ever done. We're past the 3-hour mark. It's just very involved pattern that we've got here. I'm almost done this section for tonight. I'm not used to streaming this long. That's cool. Watching from the corner as I'm going around the corner. Okay, chain 1. And now we got to do our little last grouping. And I think yeah, chain 1. We're going to finish. That's okay. I'm relatively new to this stitch also, so there might be some mistakes in mine. Again, I'm not perfect. And then that's all of those. And then this is what it's going to look like from the front. We have, oh, excuse me, we haven't done the other 2 rounds yet. The other 2 rounds are going to connect everybody up. And let me just check one more thing. Um, okay. Yeah. I'm going to find an example of what this is going to look like when you keep going further and further. See. That's Fiber Spider's video. Whoops. That's not what I want. Find images. Well, no, the next step is we have to do 2 rows all the way around to finish this to make this one. This will become a square. And then it will be triangles. Like for instance, those are some ugly patterns. Yeah, let's go.
This previous bit.
Oops. Come on. Where's he's? Here's what. Well, this is a partial of it. This is what it would look like if you keep growing it and growing it and growing. But you keep getting bigger and bigger, and it looks like the rows are like woven underneath some of them. Like it looks like this orange row kind of looks like it goes under the green and red. So that is. Well, I don't want to play the video. That is. Nope, not a fan. Hey, it's a different look. Just something new, something I would try. It takes a lot of math and not math, but thinking. It's like I got to do this and do that. Where do I join? Where do I? Yeah, and it's working back and forth, and then so. Yes, the connection points is the pain, but that's the Kaleidoscope Granny. Okay, I think that is it for tonight. I am getting sleepy. Yeah. I can get you anybody who I'm going to see tomorrow. I can get you the patterns. There's one little thing I have to make an adjustment on, which is a minor thing. Um, Message me privately which pattern you would want, or any of the other previous ones that I've done in previous streams, and I can print those up for you. I think that's it for tonight. As usual, the YouTube link for all of my past streams are down in the About section. I've got a whole back catalog of the crocodile ripple stitch. Okay, hold on. You want to see the? I got to put it on my. I have an ongoing list. I'm not exactly certain which one that is exactly because um, I'd have. There's a bunch of different crocodile ones. Um, yeah, I think that's it for tonight, and everybody have a good evening. And I will be back on tomorrow at 8 p.m. for Temperature Blanket. That's our chill night. Again, everybody have a good evening and happy crafting.